Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Church, and I'm the treasurer of the DC chapter. And we are here tonight for a special fireside chat, no pun intended, with a fireplace, with Mr. Irv Lawless, who has quite a distinguished career, as most of you hopefully know, in the organ business, especially in Washington, D.C. And so he's agreed to have a chat with us tonight to talk about his career, perhaps all the changes that have come and gone in organs over those years, and some of his special instruments in this town and outside this town, all the instruments that he's worked on and that perhaps mean something to him. So, Irv, welcome. Thank you so much for doing this with us. And I think the first question on everyone's mind is how and why did you get in the organ business? Here you are, you're a young man. What calls you to this line of work? How did you start out?
I
Tell
think
us
the
that.
actual thing, I was an organ major at Shenandoah, then Conservatory of Music, and at a practice session on the White Leg Molar we had, I had a cipher and it was too loud to ignore. So I went up in the organ to pull the pipe and got fascinated with everything up there. I grew up in an engineering family, so everything kind of fell into place. After Shenandoah, I did a brief uh, thing on teaching high school music, but they wanted to have master's degree fairly soon, and I didn't want to teach all day and go to school at night. So I looked for a job, and I went to Lewis and Hitchcock, and I was hired actually by Mr. Lewis and Mr. Hitchcock. And Mr. Lewis gave me a lot of opportunities because he realized I wasn't just looking for a job. I really wanted to do organ work. So the next day I was hired, and my first job was the new kid help on uh, releathering some of the 1911 four-manual E.M. Skinner that was at Church of the Epiphany. It was the dirtiest organ even to today that I ever was in. It looked like a coal miner when you came out of it. In later years, because Lewis and Hitchcock was representing Aileen Skinner, I was on the installation of the Epiphany new Aileen Skinner that went in, and I was in charge of the installation at National Presbyterian Church, the four manual 104 rank organ. Many people don't realize National Presbyterian also has a three manual 31 rank organ in their chapel. And I installed a number of organs for Aileen Skinner while with Lewis and Hitchcock.
So tell us about that. How old were you when you started out with Lewis and Hitchcock? So you're a young man here. They throw you right in the fire. How old were you when you started working
Yeah,
with
I
them?
was 23.
Wow, 23. So here you are, 23, faced with this large four manual Aeolian Skinner. What was that like? Was it intimidating? Was it exciting?
It was
I,
it started to be intimidating when they opened the back doors of the truck and all that organ was sitting there, and they handed me plans. And because I had with the first one I had help from Aileen Skinner. With National Presbyterian, it came in four truckloads. uh, the organ had been built, and National Presbyterian was late because of a steel strike, so the organ went into storage, and they mixed up the main organ, the antiphonal organ, and the chapel organ were all mixed up. So the first thing to do was sorting uh, several hundred ranks of organ and stuff. I also did St. Paul's United Methodist in Kensington, where Marvin Mills is now. And towards the end of all this Skinner work, they called me when they were in dire financial situations and asked if I would join them uh, and become part of Aileen Skinner and install the Kennedy Center organ and see it through no matter what happened in Boston. And I had always wanted to be involved with the new Kennedy Center, which was brand new then, even if it was a janitor. So this was my chance to get in there.
so this is around 1970, right? Early 1970s.
Yeah, yeah, and it was actually January '71 when the first truck came in.
Oh,
The hall wasn't finished, so we didn't start till September. And I ran into problems there I don't think I've run into since. One was union problems. Um, the union people wanted to unload the truck, so I let them do that. The first thing on the truck was the blower. um, but we had to deal with the union people wanting to, the carpenters wanted to set the framework up. The electricians wanted to wire the organ. And it finally got to the point where the HVAC people wanted to put the pipes in because they were in charge of all air handling units in the building. So I had to shut the job down until they were out of the building because we ended up having to stall the whole organ at nighttime and quit at 7 o'clock when the unions came back to work.
Wow. So how many nights did you spend installing this instrument? And did you have
Um,
it?
Probably 3 months of night work
Wow.
till the unions were out of there. At that time is when I started my own company also, and I got a number of service contracts right away at National Presbyterian, St. John's Lafayette Square, Epiphany, St. Paul's K Street, Christ Church, Georgetown, Sligo Seventh-day Adventist Church, Kennedy Center, and Christ Church in Savannah. They called me and had a brand new Harrison and Harrison, so I said, yes, I'll do it. And I also got contract for maintenance at Christ Church, Devonshire Parish in Bermuda, which was the worst organ I ever took care of, but I'd go anytime they asked.
Wow. So you're really branching out now. You have Georgia, you have Bermuda. Tell us about Bermuda. What was that like?
Well, I met a lot of friends there. I stayed with friends there, and the organ was terrible, but I didn't mind being down there. The only problem was that the sacristy where I did most of my work faced the road where everyone else was going to the beach, and I was stuck working on a pipe organ.
So what made that organ so terrible? Was it the tropical climate or?
Tropical climate just destroyed it. I've never seen leather. It more like, you remember the little clicker things you had as a kid? They're called a frog. That's
Yep.
that's what the leather was like in that organ. And humidity is at 80+% all year. And the church is not air conditioned, so there is warm, humid, salt air coming through the church at all times, which created a lot of problems. The reeds gummed up and that kind of thing. And they hadn't had a good maintenance contract, so that just added to the Willis was well built in the beginning, but it was literally falling apart. So it got totally rebuilt, brought over to the States by another company in later years after I left there, trying to do Bermuda and Moeller at the same time got a little difficult.
Now, so during this period, were you also playing? Were you playing any recitals, any church jobs, or were you just specifically?
For several years, I was Garnell Copeland's assistant. Actually, I was there before Garnell. I actually played on the old E.M. Skinner. Adolf Turovsky was my boss then, and I got the evening service on Sunday. And then when the new organ came in, Garnell Copeland came in, and he kept me on as his assistant. It was a little terrifying. He and I were the same age, but he played like Virgil Fox, and I didn't. So
this is at Epiphany, right?
Yes.
Epiphany. Excellent.
At Kennedy, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so then how long did you stay at Epiphany before you moved on?
I was there a little over 2 years, and I went on to Grace Church in Georgetown. They had been closed for several years, and they reopened because it turned out that the property there was donated by a family to get the river people an Episcopal church down by the river and keep them out of Christ Church in St. John's, Georgetown. And it turned out if the church was not holding Episcopal services every Sunday, it would refer to the family who donated it and would love to have an acre of property in the middle of Georgetown at that point. So I went in to get the organ fixed, and the rector came with this, "What do you do on Sunday mornings?" look on his face. And I said I'd take it a couple of weeks till they got somebody, and I ended up there 7 years, of which I had ended up with the best choir I ever had anywhere.
Nice. And now during this time, you were also doing other work at the Kennedy Center, right? Were you working with the music programs there as well as curating the instruments?
Yeah, I was, part of my contract at Kennedy Center was to be there for every rehearsal and every concert. And so, for many years, that was um, just sort of token. I was there. In later years, the organ started giving a lot of problems. And Ailing Skinner, I hate to say this, didn't do their best work on the chest work. And it started acting up. And towards the end of my time there, I was sitting up in the organ for almost everything when it was being used. Because sometimes I'd be sitting in the organ and orchestra was playing something else, not using it, or they're going to use it later. And it would just start to cipher. And I'd look down and Bill Neal was sitting in a chair beside the console. He wasn't even there. And so I was constantly up there pulling pipes during rehearsals and during concerts.
But you kept it going. So how did you feel when they finally decided to remove that instrument? I guess that must have been bittersweet, and I understand you had a part of that, right? In the removal
Yeah,
of it.
it was part of my soul, but I knew something had to happen. We took the whole organ out in 1970 or 1997 when they renovated the hall, but they didn't want to spend any money on repairing that I knew needed to be done. They had a government expert come up and look at it and said, it looks fine to me. And so I went back in. Of course, one of the problems is that when they rebuilt the hall, the organ is 15 feet further back than it was before, buried in a hole. And then they hung the canopy in front of the organ so it couldn't come out. You know, the sound just stayed back up in the organ. So it really couldn't stand up to the orchestra and our huge choruses that we have.
Well, later on, you saw the eventual rebuilding and removal of that organ and a further installation, right? So you got to see it onto a happier home.
Yeah, fortunately, I had been doing consulting work with a company down in Atlanta, and the Kennedy Center gave me the organ, and I called him, one of the people in Georgia, and said, "You got a spot for a '76 rank Ailing Skinner?" And he said, "Hold that thought." So it went down there. We took the whole organ out, and it went down to actually Georgia, where his shop was, and they completely rebuilt it. I was down there with them a lot from the ground up, new manual chest work. And it went into an 800 seat United Methodist Church down there with a huge program. They have a full-time organist, full-time assistant organist, full-time music secretary. And as far as money, they raised the whole amount of money to rebuild that organ in 6 weeks.
Wow.
Their parking lot looks like a BMW Mercedes dealership. So there's plenty of money there. And it has, they've been doing a lot of recitals and a lot of things on it. So it's much happier down there.
So that must make you happy that the organ went on to a happier home.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Awesome, the Kennedy Center. Wow, excellent. So tell us more about where your career went. I understand you had some time with the Moeller Company, and tell us about that. How did that begin? And
yeah, in 1986, Moeller was trying to reorganize. You know, we all know Moeller had problems with tonal, and they were not into solid state. There were many things they weren't into yet, and so Dan Angerstein and I were both called in that period, and we had to move them tonally. They had to move them a lot. As you know, Moeller's mixtures never were in tune and that kind of stuff. And we updated all that. We got them into solid state technology for the first time.
Why is that important? Tell us. Maybe some of us, tell us more about that. Why is solid state technology important?
Well, most builders were starting into it pretty thoroughly by the time we went to Moeller. And you know, everything, like when you don't realize how much happens when you push a piston, especially in the older organs. It has to activate a magnet, activate a pneumatic, do all these things. Just about 10 things happen before that draw knob comes out. And organists don't care how it happens. They just want it to happen. So when they push a button, now a solid state driver just drives the knob in that. And then the other thing is that solid state affords multi-memories, which of course, people really wanted that, and Moeller wasn't providing it, and they were losing some contracts before it. And any repairs in any of that solid state is so simple. Sometimes if something goes out, you just replace the card and it's done. There's no releathering, any of that stuff. And the same with the relays, which are the transmission between the console and the organ. And so we got that instilled, and it was like pulling teeth up there in Hagerstown, but we finally got it done.
And now that gave you, oh, I was gonna say that gave you the chance to work on a lot of other organs, right? With wiring and rewiring and.
Yes, and one of the things I did early on with Moeller is going out and tonally finishing a number of Moellers that never got tonally finished. That just never happened, and so I was probably a year on that. And then some of the other things I did with Moeller, I did the wiring in of the new Moeller 5-minute console at the Crystal Cathedral. It's in the South Gallery. They cover up the front organ when they had their Joy of Christmas and Joy of Easter programs, and so everything could play from the back.
Wow, so that must have been an enormous job to wire that up, right? The Crystal Cathedral, I mean.
Yes, and the one thing solid state doesn't like is sparks and things, and so I'm up there with metal rails and everything in the gallery, and the Santa Ana winds came through while we were there, so it's like 0% humidity, which encourages static, which I had to be grounded to the rails the whole time with wrist things on to wire it. And another thing I did, again, with the Charlotte organ, I did all the wiring on site down there, and I did all the tonal finishing on the Charlotte organ. So I was down there for 7 months. That's the big 5-manual, 205 rank Moeller at Calvary Church. At my time at Moeller, I gradually worked up to tonal manager, and I just got vice president just before the company crashed in 1992.
So while you were at Moeller, I mean, it's pretty impressive all the things an organ builder has to do. He has to have woodworking skills. He has to have electronics and wiring skills. He has to have piping and voicing skills. I mean, you have to be a pretty versatile person to do all these things. So how did you gain all that experience in each of those areas?
Well, it's
Wiring, finishing,
through roughage.
roughage.
Yeah, I made mistakes, and I had to learn by the mistakes. I got to study with, or work with people who were really good at their jobs. Donald Gillette, who was president of Ailing Skinner, taught me a lot on voicing. I don't quite follow his voicing sound, but what you do with a pipe when it's in your hands, cutting the pipe up, setting it on speech, the volume, matching it into all the other pipes in the rank. And, in tonal finishing, properly done, you might get 2 to 3 ranks done in a day to make it even. You've got to relate every stop to every other stop in the organ.
So I think a lot of us organists don't appreciate all the hours of work that go into that. So an average size 50 or 60 rank instrument, that's going to take you weeks just to tonally finish that, right? I mean, by the time you have it installed. And so when we sit down and play the finished product, we often forget all the work that went into it, both on the voicing side, wiring, woodworking. It's a monumental effort.
Yeah, there's many times I've had an organist come in when we're installing and say, wow, I had no idea all this went in there. Especially when they look in the chamber. A lot of times in the church, you can't see maybe just facade pipes, and that's all you see. And, there can be 3 and 4 and 5,000 pipes in an organ.
Right.
Charlotte has 11,000. So.
Now let's talk back about, so the bankruptcies of Ailing, Skinner, Moeller. Now, did organ builders at the time, did they charge a fair price for their instruments? We're talking about all these hours of labor and all the materials that went into it. I mean, did organs cost what they should cost? And do they cost that now even?
Now it's getting loud. I think they are. I can divulge this fact now. The organ at Charlotte cost $1.4 million 30 years ago, and it was underpriced with everything. I mean, you've got four 32-foot full-length stops in there right away, and a huge case, and a 5 manual console, and 11,000 pipes.
Just all the
And
woodworking alone there is phenomenal, right? All the
yeah,
just
just you think of just the framework alone, but then when you put a solid mahogany case, it's 60 feet tall, and that kind of thing. The organ has 5 shemads on it.
and I think that's something that not only us organists might not realize, but especially our parishes and our rectors and our priests and our clergy and our vestry. I mean, most churches just don't realize all the labor that goes into these instruments and why they cost so much.
That's true.
So, how have you, I guess, throughout your career, have you ever had the opportunities to talk to churches and educate them on the cost of these instruments and why they cost so much? And
Yeah, a lot of times, even as a consultant, sometimes I'm working with a church that has chosen 5 different builders to look at. I take them not only to see organs by those builders, but to look in the chamber and see how much is involved um, in it. And I've also worked with AGO chapters on that for the organist to understand all this. Uh, it's very complicated, and we don't expect an organist to be able to rebuild the organ, but they should know, like a clarinetist can replace a pad on a key on a clarinet, and the organist should be able to pull a pipe or find out, know how to describe the problem and get around certain things so you don't have to wheel a piano in on Sunday morning.
well, I think we all loved your demo session a few years ago at our AGO President's Day Sunday event. And I know that there's a huge desire for us to do that again when we can hopefully gather in person at one point, sometime soon, I hope. So please stay tuned and consider us for that again.
Oh, sure.
But I guess if we could go back to your days at Moeller. So we were talking before. So Moeller went bankrupt. You were VP. Then what do? You're VP of a company, and they closed. What happened to any projects that were in the works at that time? Did they?
At Moeller,
Yeah. What did they do?
some of them, like Calvary Baptist Church in Washington, uh, the whole organ, that was a 1927 4 manual 87 rank Moeller that was spread out over the 175,000 square feet of the Moeller factory. And when the company closed, and so the church got me and my company to go through the factory and gather up all the parts. At the same time, there was another large Moeller all over the factory. So the team that was moving that and I were helping each other find parts for each other's organ. And we put it in storage. And Wix picked up the contract to complete the organ. Um, it wasn't as big as it was planned because Calvary Baptist lost a lot of money down payment to Moeller. So Wix was able to pick it up for what was left, and they had to eliminate certain ranks and things like that. And there were other churches that just, if I can say, got screwed. And it's an unfortunate thing because the closing was very fast how it happened. I came home for lunch one day and we went back in. And I was called into a senior staff meeting and said, "Well, that's it, we're closed."
Wow.
Didn't have any time to think about it.
Now there were some other Moellers in town too that had in this situation too. Like I think you mentioned St. Matthew's Cathedral, perhaps they had a Moeller that was in the process of.
Yeah, they had a big Moeller from the 50s and had added stuff in the back. But their problem was that they had gotten a contract for a new organ from Schutte in Texas. And Schutte went belly up halfway through it. It was just built up in their factory. So the president of Moeller said, "Oh, we can finish it." So it all got dragged up to Hagerstown on the 3rd floor of Moeller. If anybody's seen the Moeller factory, you know how big that is. And two of us were sorting for several weeks all the parts, and then Moeller went belly up. And St. Matthew's was getting a little tired of this. So they got Lively Fulcher, but the condition was that they would build the organ at the cathedral. They gave them space for a shop and everything. And at that point, it went from being a 4 manual to a 2 manual organ with a 4 manual console on it, because that's where the money had gone. And Lively Fulcher did a tremendous job what they did. And now that it's finished, it's just fantastic.
Wow. So tell us more about your career then after Moeller. After Moeller closes, you went on to do what?
Well, I had a bid in just before Moeller closed. The Kennedy Center organ needed to be the console needed to be rebuilt, and it only had a single memory, and it was beginning to memorize for itself. So I had put in a bid for it, and the day that Moeller crashed, it just so happened that the donor, Mrs. Schaus, who gave Wolfstrap Farm, also um, called me and said that they had decided to go ahead with the rebuild. So I had a business almost a day after Moeller closed. We had to get a shop and facilities and everything. So we rebuilt the console, and two of us started a company. It was actually one of the two of us was the tracker guy that helped me sort all stuff. And so we did pick up, you'll do anything when you need money. We picked up 7 jobs, installation for Wicks. And some of them were rather large organs up in New England in the Connecticut moneyed area, some very large organs. And then we started picking up jobs here. We had to completely rebuild the console at National City. So it was in our shop for 4 months, sorry. Local organists were stopping by to see this because this is mostly 2 manual territory up here. And we rebuilt the back organ first. And so they went for 4 months on just the back organ, which shows that an organ speaking directly down the axis of the nave, placed halfway up the wall, will do a really big job, which it did. It was able to handle the hymns and everything. We did a lot of revoicing at National City. And one of the jobs when Moeller crashed that had just been installed was the chapel at Camp David, the presidential retreat.
All right.
So we picked that up right away, and I did the tonal finishing, and we still have the maintenance on that now. They know at the gate more about the underside of my car than the manufacturer does, but once you get through there, it's a nice place to work, very nice place to work. And then we had built, in my first company, I rebuilt the organ at St. Paul's K Street, and when they got the Schoenstein church in Chambersburg, a brand new large Methodist church, bought the organ, and we rebuilt that from the ground up. So it's 56 ranks on 3. And then we got called into Wilson College in Chambersburg. They have a white leg Moeller, which were very special Moellers during his period of 1935 to 1944. And it wasn't playing, but once I got it playing by devious means, I thought, wow, this is a good organ, and found out that Whiteleg had put his all into this organ to keep the college from buying a Skinner. And this is 4 manuals, 63 ranks, and 3 of the 4 manuals have full choruses and swell reeds to die for, and a nice solo organ. And we've had quite a recital series up there. We've had people like Tom Murray, Ken Cowan, and all these people, and they really like it. I just on a field trip with Nathan Laub one day, I took him over there and I couldn't get him off the bench. He enjoyed playing, and everybody's saying, I can't believe I'm playing a 1937 Bowler and I don't want to leave it. And so, that's been very successful in a concert series. And we did organs at Seneca Falls, Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Chambersburg. We've done several 3 manuals, total rebuilds, and several new organs. One of our last 2 is in Front Royal, Virginia, at the Episcopal Church. And so that's keeping us going right now. They're doing a lot of rebuild stuff. So I'm glad for that right now, because business is a little tight right now with this COVID situation. And a lot of churches are getting more detailed work done because they're not having services right now. But
Right. Now, wait a second. I thought you were retired. What's all this work that you're still doing? Tell us about that.
well, organ builders, I guess, never retire. I'm doing consultant work for several churches right now, and I go up to the shop every once in a while if Cindy lets me. She's my was my office manager who did all the organization of the company, keeping things together. I think she's spying on me right now. But are you there, Cindy? I see she's on the.
So you're not really retired then. You've lied to our viewers here.
Right. I just enjoy.
You probably will never retire, which is probably a good thing, right?
Yeah. I just enjoy being able to enjoy that second cup of coffee in the morning. So.
What's that? The second cup of coffee in the morning?
Yeah, I can get that now.
All right. So let me ask you this. So if you actually do retire, what would you like to do for fun outside of the organ world? Like what keeps you busy if you're not?
Well, I did want to do some travel beyond just around here. I've been to England. I love it there, and we went to France a couple of years ago. But I've known Rick Elliott since before he went out to Salt Lake City, and I have a standing invitation to go out and see and play and crawl through the tabernacle organ, which is something I really want to do. Of all the organs, I've seen so many other organs, but that one to me is special. That is an unusual instrument.
So I'm very surprised, like a man of your stature, and you haven't visited all the famous organs in this country, have you? I mean, I would think you'd be able to tell me all about New York, Chicago, and all the big cities and instruments. But
I've been to a lot of those.
You have seen and experienced and played a lot of those, and so
yeah.
Tell us, what are some of your favorite instruments then around this great country, like New York, Chicago, Washington? Where are the great organs that you?
Well, of course, I really like the organ in church work more than anything, and I've heard just some thrilling services, and I tend to love the St. John of the Divine in New York, like that, and any place that the organist is fantastic with hymn work. I want to hear that organ. I heard St. Thomas, New York, and the old organ with Jerry Hancock and things like that. In my youth, I did actually hear Virgil Fox play at Riverside before he left there. So a hymn with Virgil.
Virgil Fox at the Kennedy Center too, right?
We had him there 5 times.
Yeah.
Working for him was a little difficult. First thing you had to do was adjust the tremolos just right. And
he would come in there and just make you do all this work on the organ before his recital. He was never happy with anything, or
he wasn't terrible. He wanted the Reed's tune, but he played so fast you couldn't hear if it was in tune or not. But he also wanted me there the entire time he was practicing. And that was kind of exciting in one way, to be at Kennedy Center at night.
He stayed up all night, right?
Yeah. So I'd be there all night with him, and he'd be just practicing away. And I could just lay in the aisle on the floor, just lay down and listen to free Virgil Fox recital all night. And every once in a while, he'd call and say, he always called everybody honey. He'd say, "Irv, honey, do you like this flute better here or this flute?" And I would say something, but he didn't care what I thought. He just wanted to make sure I was still out there, because he wanted to hear my answer. And at the end of each one of those, I used to sometimes think of the merits of justifiable homicide. But he always seemed to know, he used to greet the entire audience afterwards in the green room. They'd come filing through there, and that would go on for another 2 hours. And he seemed to know when my family or something would come through, because then he'd give me credit verbally real loud, probably so I wouldn't kill him. But we got along fine. And, it was an experience I would never trade off working with him, to see what he could do with an organ. I knew Kennedy Center like the back of my hand, but he got sounds of it I didn't know were in it. He just turned it inside out. He really did.
Now, sadly, I think a lot of folks, myself included, I wasn't old enough to ever hear Virgil Fox play before he, died. And I'm sure some of our listeners are the same. But I mean, what were his concerts like? I mean, they were like a rock concert, weren't they? I mean, just
Well,
packed people,
he didn't
overflowing.
get he didn't get into that till later.
Okay.
When he had all the sound, the screen with all the lights and everything. When he was, if you will, more serious, and those recitals could go on as long as 3 hours, and it went by just like that because he was such an entertainer. Uh, when he played at National City on the old organ, that thing that's behind the console that rolls out of the way now didn't, and they had this massive mirror on top of the console, so you could see him like you were standing on top of the console looking down, and just watching. He there was a complete show on his registration too, and because he only had one memory, a lot of times he'd be playing what you would play with both hands. He'd be playing with one hand and changing registrations. And part of some of his show stuff, I know because I knew him well enough after a while, he always did a hymn at the end of his concerts. And by that time, everybody was so warm, so hyped up. And he always played for full house, absolutely jammed, people standing in the aisles and everything. So he'd say, "I want you to sing like you never sang in church before." And he had that Skinner wide open with the tuba coupled in. Uh, and while he was playing, you could see he was looking over, and there was one knob not out, and it was the swell boarding that borrows into the pedal. So it was already playing through the couplers. But that had everybody's attention looking at that draw knob. And while we were looking at that, he'd reach over and hit pedal 6 and it would pop out, but it gave the illusion he just glared at it and it came out, "Yes, master." So he was a real showman. And, he'd tell lots of stories during it. In later years, he used the gimmick with the light show and all that to kind of pull away from organists who didn't use that kind of thing. And he got kind of out of popularity in his later years because people were getting turned off with all the clowning around. But now, today, 30 years after he died, he's more popular than he was before. So, and actually, I guess it's 40 years after he died because he died in 1980.
1980, yeah. All right, so we talked about everything organ related, and I tried to get you to tell me what are some of your outside interests besides the organ. So we talked about traveling. You want to do more traveling. Anything else that keeps your mind occupied besides organs?
Well, I'm into classical cars,
Ah,
and I have a 1983 Mercedes 380 SL. It's a little two-seat roadster that has become my weekend money pit. I've done a lot of work on it in restoration. It's almost now done, except the cosmetics like the seats and the convertible roof. It has a hard top that comes off in the spring and goes back on in the fall, with two friends in an argument to help me. It's very awkward. And I'm also into ocean liners, and I have studied a lot on that. It started out with Titanic, like a lot of ocean liner freaks, I guess. And I got into both the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth, the original one. I've been up to California, and I took the expensive tour through the Queen Mary. They have the regular tour and then the one you pay more for, and it's usually a group of 5 or 6 people, but you get to go up in the bridge and
room, all that.
pretend you're steering, that kind of thing. And then down into the engine rooms, you don't realize how big those things are. The engines are all missing, but they just have a mock-up of one engine. And I think the engine room is bigger than the concert hall. And that's just one space in that whole ship. And so I've been tracking that. And of course, there's one of them left. The one that was in our country was the United States. And it was built in 1951. It was just before jet engines were invented. And you could get to England in 4 or 5 hours rather than 4 or 5 days. And so it was only active for about 17 or 18 years, and it was decommissioned, and it has been dead for 51 years, but it's still floating, and it's up in Philadelphia now.
Yep.
It's very spooky seeing that huge ghost of an ocean liner just sitting there. They have all sorts of ideas of what to do with it. Um, the designer, Mr. Gibbs, his daughter is in charge of trying to find something to do with it, and there is a foundation to, at this point, keep it floating. So it's a spooky thing when you go by it. It's all rusted up.
Oh yeah, I've driven by it. Anyone driving up to Philadelphia gets to drive past it on the highway just south of the city.
Yeah,
It's there all rusting away. It's sad to see that.
it really is. One of the things I'm not into as much as other organ builders are is a lot of organ builders seem to be very into railroads. I enjoy it, but some of them are so serious. I know up in New England, Bill Seluzniak, when he goes to the Texas Organ Festival, he charts all the way he can go by train and the longest way. So he can ride trains as much. And I know a number of other organ builders who are very into trains and railroads.
I wonder why that is. A psychologist should do a study on that because me personally, I play the organ. I like organs. I like cars, and I also like trains. So I don't know. There must be some strange thing in our DNA. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, it must be.
Interesting, because I would agree with you on that. So you spent your whole career in DC. Tell us on a personal note, how has the city changed over the years? You've been here for a while. How has the music scene changed? You know, I go to concerts now, obviously pre-COVID, and it's disheartening because you don't see as many people there. But I assume a long time ago it was a busier, more exciting.
Yeah, I remember, Chris. There weren't as many organ recitals, and one of the pinnacle ones was the Cathedral, which they still have their recitals, but they were growing, and a lot of people used to come to Evensong to sit through and enjoy Evensong, and then a recital right afterwards. And I think Doug Major was one of the people that woke people up into not just a dead organ recital. He did one, and he's the first person to perform the Sousa Stars and Stripes Forever on the Cathedral organ, which prompted something that had never happened before in the Cathedral, is a massive applause. A lot of people came because they knew he was going to play it, and it kind of woke up the whole series even more. And then, of course, we had, Garno Copeland, whenever he'd play there, there'd be people even out in the nave because he really made the organ go. I mean, he wasn't afraid of it, and he played major blockbuster works. But even Georgetown Presbyterian, where Bill Watkins was for years, whenever he'd give a recital, there'd be a lot of people there. And at Epiphany, St. John's, when Al Russell would give recitals, you'd fill the church. And I think there's just too much else going on right now. And we have a lot of really good organists now, which we didn't have then. I mean, these younger people coming out of the schools now are way better than they were back then. But the problem is there's so many of them. You can have, and we've seen it in our own city here, is that you'll have two major players on the same night, and then you have a smaller audience and you split it in half. There's a few that will draw right now. Nathan Loud will always draw people, and I've seen even up here in Hagerstown, he played up here and the church was jammed. Of course, a lot of them were from Washington that came up.
So what's your advice for some of our young organists that might be listening here tonight? What can they do to perhaps when COVID ends to drum up more excitement and get bigger crowds?
I think a lot of them are doing it. A lot of them, which back when I remember, organists didn't speak very much. They play, they might greet them, and that's it. Now a lot of them talk a little bit about the piece they're playing and stuff. I think the problem still is that there's too many things going on, and then we'll have a dry spot of nothing. We need to space it out better. The organists certainly play well. Many of them are much more aware of how to use an organ. rather than just pull stops and play. They really think about what they're pulling, and they get some. I mean, I've turned pages for a lot of these organists, and I see how hard that they have worked. They know their music, but they learn the organ too. And they sometimes they come in their first session is they don't play any of their music. They just sit there and combine and mix sounds together to see how it will work. And I'm always amazed with how much they do know about the organ. Uh, we still have a lot of people that don't. And that's why I think more organists need to study that, because knowing the organ is how you can register better too. And if there's a stop that isn't working right on a Sunday morning, how can you get around it besides just canceling your prelude kind of thing?
So tell us, what are some of your favorite instruments in Washington, D.C.? If you had some favorites, where would you most likely want to go and hear a recital?
Well, I'm a little partial to National City, not because I have a lot to do with it, but I like the sound, and especially since it's finally been voiced. And a lot of people, I do watch how they use it. Um, Used to be you'd go to a big organ like that and you play on the grate and you want a big sound, you pull out every knob on the grate. That's not how they register. And I watch sometimes from the audience when they play a piece they've gotten really big on the organ. It sounds fantastic, and they push the cancel, and there's just a few knobs go in because they carefully registered it. I do like the organ at St. Matthew's Cathedral. That is a fine instrument. Um, I like St. Paul's K Street, especially that organ lends to whoever's playing it, and you need to know how to play a Schoenstein. And Jeffrey Smith does that a very good job of it.
Well, thank you. I want to give some time for some folks on the line to ask some questions. I don't know if people have been typing in questions because I probably haven't asked all the things people want to ask. So I'm not sure if my buddy Jeff is still there, if he's been fielding some questions coming in. I have not been, so I don't know if people have been pinging with questions.
Yeah, I'm here, and we don't actually have any questions, but people are welcome to.
Do we want to open up the microphone and open the floor for questions? If there's any individual people that have a question, that'd be a...
I got one request just before we started from Ben Bellner. I see he's online there with a big 4-manual console behind him. Ben is the curator of First Baptist, where Lon is, and also the huge Austin organ at St. Matthew's Lutheran Church in Hanover, Pennsylvania. And can you open the mic for Ben, or shall I just repeat his question?
You're on, Ben.
Irv, you got to tell us about Calvary. You know, that's such a monumental time in your life. And it's something that you've told me about. But how long did you actually have to spend doing the tonal finishing and cleaning up the molar mess at Calvary? Because it is 205 ranks, and you don't, realize how monstrous of an instrument it really is. I mean, because I remember you saying you spent a good part of your life being homesick.
Yeah, I was down there for 7 months. And we worked mostly Monday through Saturday. And about every third week, I did come home for the weekend. I think my car could make that trip without me after that. I think I had 35 trips totally from Charlotte to Hagerstown. And of course, tonal finishing was very, very intense because that organ's on high pressure and everything's very loud, especially when you're up in the chamber. And so I had to treat the person in the chamber very kindly. Like when he was working on a pipe, I didn't sit there and play on anything. I gave him the break.
It's amazing.
I have a question. I'm a member of all 3 of the tri-chapters. Would you have any particular comments of the organs of your particular favorites of the Potomac chapter of the AGO and the Northern Virginia chapter areas? You'd mentioned of the District of Columbia.
What favorite organs in that area?
Yes, of Potomac and then Northern Virginia.
Okay, I know the Northern Virginia, the organ at St. Luke Catholic Church, Steiner Rec, is a very exciting organ. Again, when the right person plays it, you have to know how to play that organ. There's so many of them I do like. It's hard to filter that out. In the Potomac area, I'm trying to think of any that's a favorite. I like so many, especially it's how an organist uses the organ. And I've heard some very fine examples of that. I'm sorry, I can't answer that very well.
Would Damascus Methodist
Broad
be one of
area.
them?
Excuse me?
It was a broad area.
Somebody said Damascus Methodist.
That's
Ah,
I love that organ. We rebuilt the console on it. That organ was from Metropolitan Methodist Church in DC, across from American University. And it was moved there in 1960. They paid $7,000 for that organ and $7,000 to install it. And it was very well installed there. And Damascus has always had a very good music program and very good organists. And the console got totally worn out. Everything moved side to side as far as it did up and down. So we rebuilt it, and we tried to keep absolutely the Skinner look to it, even down to the font on the draw knobs. And the young organist there really knows how to use that organ and how to play it. And I love hearing that organ.
Are there any other questions from the viewers? Everyone's shy tonight. Everyone unmuted? I don't have any more questions, my friend.
It's been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed hearing it.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a great career. My parting words would be, lastly, I'd like to sincerely thank all the people who worked with me, helped me, supported me, and were responsible for giving me the opportunity to have this career.
Thank you for nurturing people like me, Irv. You know, it's as somebody that's young in the organ business, you don't find organ people that are nice to us younger people. They don't want to share your wealth of knowledge, and sometimes they're like, well, figure it out on your own. I don't know how many times I've called you with help.
Well, we need people like you, Ben. You're the next generation.
Irv, you've got to tell some stories. The one that I loved that you told was going to West Virginia to see some basket case of an instrument and coming out of the chamber to go into the other chamber, and the minister was there, and he looked at you and you said, you just made a comment, God, I need a beer.
Yeah, that was in Martinsburg, West Virginia, at the Episcopal Church. The organ had been installed by a guy, and it was really horrible. And I was getting ready to think, I don't even want to be here. And I sat down and I said, God, I need a beer. And the minister came running back with a 6-pack and said, don't leave.
Oh, that's wonderful.
You have any other good stories like that?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of them. But
Paul Calloway.
everybody's got Calloway stories. You know, he used to be such a thrilling hymn player, and a group of us were talking to him. But how he does that. How do you plan this and do that? And he says, I don't plan it, I just play it. And that was his answer for everything. But, you know, he was one of several people who were some of the worst, most horrible drivers I ever rode with. With Paul and Bill Watkins, if it was there, they hit it. You know, when Paul retired from the cathedral, he took up a position at St. Paul's K Street for a while. And he used to back out of his parking place. And that, if you've been in that parking lot, it's pretty tight. But there's also blue scratch marks all over the fences and everything around there, where he had this 1971 Buick Centurion, which was so big that it looked like nobody was driving it when he would come through, because Paul was very small. And he'd back up and slam into something, and he asked Barry, his assistant, was that a car I hit? And Barry said, no, it was the church. He said, okay, and he just put it in drive and left. There's a big blue scar on the side of the church at the time. Bill Watkins was the same way, except he drove so slow, you'd come around the corner and you see it, and you knew he'd hit it, and he did. And I don't know, there must have been guardian angels for both of them. You'd go out to dinner with Paul, and of course he always had a little bit too much to drink. And he parked by what we call the Braille method. He'd back in, and when he hit the car behind him, he'd go forward and hit the front in front of him and say, well, there, we're here.
That was back when cars had really strong bumpers, I guess, right?
Yeah, and I think he made the parking spot bigger by pushing the cars back and forward.
Wow. So any other good stories to share with us, perhaps from your youth? Any reckless stories we could all laugh about?
Oh, God.
Keeping it PG, rated PG.
I can't think of anything I can tell on this thing. Working with Garnell Copeland was always a mess. He was bipolar as he could be, and he could be from really good mood to terrible in just a second. One Sunday, I was his assistant, but he was doing all the playing that Sunday. And he was up forever losing his keys. Epiphany organ turned on with the key, and I had mine, so we turned the organ on. And he hadn't decided what he was going to play for postlude yet. So during the sermon, he decided to go up to the choir room and get the music. Well, because he didn't have his keys, the secretary had locked the room. And so he was up there pulling on the door like crazy. These doors are about 11 feet tall. And the secretary came through there, and the two of them never did get along. And she said, if you ask me nicely, I'll open the door. And I thought, oh boy, that was not the right thing to say. And he was pulling really hard, and she went into her office, and I took the hinge pins out of the door so we could get the door open, and it wouldn't open easily. So he was still yanking and pulling. Well, then she thought he tore the door off the hinges, and he was screaming, shut up. She was screaming, and downstairs they're still having church. And then he got his music. The door had come up, it hit an old pew in the hallway and put a big hash mark, and the Sunday school let out, and all the little kids were standing there staring at all this. So he went downstairs, his mood changed to pleasant again. He played his postlude. I put the door back on the hinges. This little bell he tore off that had belonged to the previous organist, I put it back on, and I shifted the pew with the one that was down the hall, moved them back up, and she came running up with the junior and senior warden and told them, you know, he'd torn the door off the hinges and killed several little children and all that, and everything's sitting there calm. And she screams to me, you won't get away with this. So it was quite an afternoon.
That's behavior that just wouldn't happen today, I guess, right?
No, I don't think so.
We'd all be fired immediately.
There was a story you told about the new organ came, and she would always throw her keys down on the lid of the console. And she did that for the first time on the lid of the new organ console.
Yeah, she had this big wad of keys. Every church and every door in that church had its own key. There was no master system. And she'd always gone in to check the flowers on the altar and that stuff and slammed them down on the old Skinner console. She did it while Darnell was practicing, which startled him. And he picked up the whole ring of keys and threw it across the chancel, and it hit the marble wall, and the chain broke and all the keys went all over the floor, and he went back to practicing. Part of my job was to be the liaison between the congregation and Garnell. He could change in just a second. After a postlude one time, everybody used to come up in the chancel that wanted to hear the postlude because he always played a blockbuster for a postlude. And he'd finished and got up and greeted a few people. And one couple asked what kind of organ is it. He suddenly changed to the bad mood and said, "The nameplate's on the console. Can't you read?" And he walked out. So you never knew what you had with him.
Not a good thing to say to parishioners who are writing checks, I guess, right?
You're right.
Well, so that was a crazy time then, I guess, huh? At Epiphany.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And he had a big choir, and he had quite a following. Like I say, after the benediction, he'd play a couple of real lush chords and stuff like that, and those who wanted to go to coffee hour would. And then about 50 people, that's when we had people going to church there. About 50 people would come up in the chancel, and he rarely had the postlude listed because he would think he had everything memorized. And if there were some other organists there that he wanted to put down, which he was good at, he would stop before the postlude, take the music rack off and set it on top of the console, and then play something he knew was so difficult they couldn't even begin to play it. And just launch into the fugue from the Dupre variations, something like that, for a postlude.
Wow. That was one of your very first jobs out of college, right? And didn't you work for if I can say this politely, the Steinway dealership there across the street?
No, I never worked over there. I bought music there. That was a Kit's.
Right.
Or Jordan's, one of them, yeah.
Right.
That's when we had 3 music stores within a block of each other.
Yeah, back in the day, that's where all the piano dealers were located. And in that block and the next block, all the music dealers and Stoops, who became, I think Arthur Jordan was the manager of that. But that's where you went to buy a piano back in the. So they were, when you were first there, they were still piano dealers in the neighborhood.
Oh, yeah, because that second floor was all pianos.
Yeah, wow.
There's one little more thing about the talent of Garnell. One of the noonday recitals, he had other people play a lot of them, but he was playing that day and he didn't show up. And just at exactly the time the recital started, he walked down the aisle, and he'd been over at Kit's Music buying music, and he opened the music that he just bought. And that was one of the first times I saw him use music. And he opened it, and the sales slip fell down on the floor, and he sight read it on the recital better than most people could play it. So it's just an incredible talent. I'd see him in the middle. We'd go at the cathedral some nights during the CCM days, and he'd play some major piece on the cathedral organ and just stop and say something and tell a story, and then go back and pick up on the very next note, like the pause button on a CD player. I never figured how his brain worked.